Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about pivots, business pivots and organizational pivots. And I've got with me Paul Avins, who's a longtime friend. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Dave. Great. Thanks for having me on the show, man. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Paul, can you just kick off by just introducing yourself and telling us what you do?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, obviously, you and I have known each other, I don't know, probably about 10 years now, I would think.
Yes, I would say so.
But for the last 17 years, I've been helping entrepreneurs, business owners to build what we call kind of grown-up businesses. So really going through the stage of how to start, scale up and build a grown-up business, as I like to refer to it. So I've been business coaching, consulting, training, running masterminds really for the last 17 years, particularly masterminds. The F12 mastermind now has been running for 8 years in the UK. But before that, I was an entrepreneur. So I was an entrepreneur first, and then I came to the industry of coaching, consulting and training really out of a passion to serve and to help people, having, started and run 5 businesses, 3 successfully, and 2 spectacularly not successfully, which taught me a huge amount. And I had a passion to really go and share with people and stop people experiencing some of the pain that I'd been through on that journey. But also really just a fascination as to why is it some businesses seem to succeed and thrive and do stunningly well when other businesses in the same industry just, struggle and fall over, and what is the difference that makes the difference? So for me, that's kind of been a question that's driven me the whole of my kind of career up to this point. So obviously during that 17-year period, we've had a number of recessions. During that period, we've had a number of crises, all kinds of things that we've had to help navigate clients through and support them. And it's just, I became really fascinated with this whole concept of agile, not just agile businesses, but also how do you pivot? How do you really what have we done over the years that's worked? And then obviously when your research came out, I was like, oh, this is interesting, because there's research that actually substantiates some of the things that I've been seeing over the last 17 years that work. And sadly, and this is the sad thing, I think, is that too many business owners try and figure it out through trial and error. And having done trial and error myself, it's a very expensive, painful way to learn anything. So anytime there's data or research that you can interpret, and I think that's always the challenge for business owners, is they're too busy in what I call the head down space of just trying to survive, to spend the time to look up and go, hang on a second, are we actually doing the right things?
Yeah.
Any opportunity to share some of those insights to your audience who's listening to this and to serve them and to help, then great, I'm happy to share.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I wrote the book about pivots and what the research is saying. So, Paul, you've had direct contact, obviously you've had your own businesses and you've had direct contact with kind of thousands of businesses, kind of from one person band type jobs right up to multi-million pound operations that I'm aware of. So just for you and from your experience, what does a pivot actually mean?
So I think, I'm very fortunate. Today, as well as the coaching business, I own a team training and consultancy and profiling company, as well as a online digital marketing agency as well. So, I've got 3 different businesses that I run. But I think the key thing here is, I think people need to be aware there's a difference between a pivot and a dash for cash. And let me explain what I mean by this, because I think sometimes people assume it's a pivot when it isn't, it's a dash for cash. So like, if we take a really good example in the last couple of months. So when the coronavirus hit, and I've got a client who is in the optics field, and they had a great distribution network in China. And they were able to access PPE equipment really well, really fast, really early in the cycle. And they were able to get in, leverage those contacts. And whilst their normal business, couldn't really function at the same level, because obviously all the retailers are shut down, there was going to be this demand for PPE equipment as businesses started to open back up. And they were able to get in there because of their network. They were able to source really high quality product, and they were able to get it into the UK, and they were able to actually get onto the approved supplier list for some of the major hospitals. And they were able to sort and serve people at a higher level. And that's important. It wasn't just about making a profit, it was about serving people, which is, for them was a really key part. But the reality was that was never going to be a sustainable long-term pivot. That was a short-term opportunity to fill a real urgent need in the marketplace, to leverage some contacts and to generate some revenue and, some not massive profits, but to be able to generate profits where the the business would previously have not been able to generate anything during lockdown. Now, the reality is that market is now pretty much collapsed. It's oversupplied. Everything's become commoditized. There's very little margin in it now because everybody's piled in. So, as I said to them at the time, I said, listen, you've probably got, maybe 60 days where you're ahead of the curve because of your relationships. So you can get in, serve people, make a difference, make some money, and then get out. It's not a long-term sustainable pivot, right? It's just an opportunity in the short term.
Yeah.
I think sometimes there's a difference here between, as I would say, the money is always moving, and pivots are about when you find that new source of flow, that new source of cash flow. So if you assume, like in any market, if you look at a market, sometimes the money's there and then the money moves. And the pivot is really just relocating where the money's gone to, and then supplying products and services that go to where that need is. So if you've got the mindset that the fact that things are always moving, that the money's moving, then you're able to see pivots as just moving ahead of where the money's going to go next.
Yeah.
And the truth is that it's got to have a level of sustainability. So it's not a short-term thing. It's going to last for at least, a couple of years or so. The reality is, so you're able to build repeat customers out of that. It's not a kind of one-time sell and then get out. That's not a pivot. That's a dash for cash.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of following the market and being flexible enough to work out where the market's going and being able to keep up with it, rather than kind of going out of business because you stay with a market that's actually dying.
Yeah, I think there's also a difference here between pivot and what you do and how you do it. So let me give you a good example, right? So in my own world, obviously, the minute, F12 Mastermind, we met in London in March, but then there was a lockdown literally the week after we met, which meant we couldn't meet. So we're not going to meet in April, May, and June. Obviously, you might hear some noise behind me. They're taking the marquee down from yesterday, where we met in a marquee outside my house. Yeah, we were able to actually hold it outside in a marquee yesterday. But the reality was, in the interim, we had to figure out how to deliver the value. And then we obviously moved to platforms like Zoom and models like that. Now, that wasn't a change in what we did. What we did was still the same. We were still coaching, training, empowering people and supporting them. But how we did it shifted. Now, that, in my mind, that's not a pivot. That's more just a shift in how you deliver the value, as opposed to a true pivot, if that makes sense, right?
Yes.
So for me, that's not a pivot. And lots of people have been posting, and I see people go, oh, we've pivoted to online. No, you just shifted how you're doing what you were doing. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not a pivot, right?
Yeah.
If you're just doing it differently, that's not a true pivot in my mind.
Yeah. True
pivot involves value creation, and it involves this ability to kind of go, look, we can go from value creation to value realization. We're able to create it and realize the value. And if you've already got a good model for creating value and realizing it, you just might be shifting the way you're realizing the value.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that's kind of come out of the research is this kind of clarification of what a pivot, which is really seen, as I say, from a research point of view, as kind of a primary method of moving a business into a new direction.
Yeah.
In effect, it's what we call a strategic reorientation. And it usually either entails kind of repositioning the direction and the aims and the goals of the business or the organization, kind of creating and testing a new direction, which is fundamentally different from the original one, and strategically realigning the business or organization with current market forces, as you were saying, following the money and the needs of society, but also the needs
demand,
of the businesses.
I'm a great believer in trying to make things real and tangible, because I think the challenges sometimes with research is it becomes quite intellectual and theoretical, and you go, but how does that actually really work? So I'll give you another example from an F12 client of ours. So they were in the event space. So in February, they had a really full events, calendar, right? They're building exhibition stands. They're doing, full-on events for clients. Obviously, the minute the COVID hits, that entire order book disappears. Like, you're talking about millions of pounds of revenue that just disappear. So the question then becomes, okay, the first thing I think, and this is a critical piece, is you've got to do an internal audit, right? So there's no, what are the internal skills of the organization? What is the ability that the organization has to create value? And then ask the question, how could we redeploy those skills, capabilities, and resources to create value where there is a different demand. And what they did was go, look, where's the demand shift? Well, suddenly everyone's working from home, which means, okay, there's a massive demand now for people to have at-home desks, you know, how to work at home desks. There's a massive demand for people to have laptop, like that laptop stands that I'm on now, actually, that can actually go on top of a normal desk so that you can have a standing up desk at home. Now, they're able to manufacture all of that in-house. They've got the capability, they've got the raw materials, so there wasn't an issue with supply chain because they already had it in stock. And they're 100% environmentally and 100% recyclable, which is a big trend. Obviously, everyone wants to get back to being that. So they were able to, the first pivot was to do that. They moved into that market really early. They started making a lot of money. They're actually able to bring back everybody off furlough to actually meet the demand that was generated. And then the next demand that was obviously going to come through was the Perspex screens for shops and offices as they started to open up. And again, they had supply, they were able to create it, and they were able to create the first 100% environmentally friendly Perspex screen, which at the end of it, if you want, you can send back to them and get broken down and reused again. So, and they were able to come out with that ahead of the curve. We helped them build an online sales funnel for it. And we were able to launch, and this is a key as well, we're able to launch really quickly to test the demand. Before they manufacture the product, you actually test the demand. Will people pay for it? And yeah, absolutely. Then you go out and then you build a distribution network and you partner with people. And next thing you know, they want a contract with, I can't tell you who, but with a major sporting organization for 6 figures. And, you go, well, none of that existed, 4 weeks ago. But it's that ability to go, what have we got? What are we good at? Where is there a need? And how can we create value and then realize that value rapidly and then scale it?
So there's this organizational flexibility that's the heart of a pivot, because as you say, it's not just like a short-term thing. Usually what a proper pivot is talking about here is we're reorganizing the kind of structures, the systems, the production and the procedures in order to shift. So it's a longer term thing.
And I think that doesn't, if you take the examples of the screens, it's interesting because obviously initially there was a massive amount of people wanting screens for retail and offices and stuff. Now that demand's starting to drop off, obviously. Now, is that a dash for cash? Maybe, but actually the pivot is more about creating environment. They've shifted the messaging of the company to be, look, we're experts in creating environmentally friendly, 100% recyclable products that keep your employees and customers safe. So that's the pivot that they've gone on. They're not just going, we used to be an exhibition company. No, now we're a company that creates and manufactures 100% recyclable products that keep your employees and your customers safe. So that's the strategic pivot. The product mix is going to change inside that over time, of course. But that's the strategic messaging. And now customers go, okay, I get what you do.
Yeah, and it's having this, as I was saying, it's having this strategic, but also the resource flexibility to be able to do that. And quite a lot of that's about the mindset of the people within the organization and whether they're open to change, and whether the founders or the actual organizations open to change are able to actually be flexible and quickly.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting with that one as well is I think it depends. I've got a passion for profiling, as you know, and within the profiling company that I own, it depends on what someone's profile is as to how easy they are to adapt to change and pivot, and whether they're resistant to that change and whether they fight it. And I also think there's a mindset here, which is some people, I'm sure you and I remember the great book, Who Moved My Cheese? If you haven't read it, that whole idea of, look, someone's moved the cheese and some people just have a strop about the fact that the cheese has moved and other people go look for the new cheese. And I think the challenge is when it happens as fast as it sometimes does in markets, and in COVID's a great example, although we had a great example in 2008 with the economic crisis, it happened so fast. Some business entrepreneurs and some experts and senior managers in companies, they can't kind of deal with how rapid that change happens, and they find it very hard to adjust and accept the reality that there's a new world right now and you've got to change. That's, some people can do that easier than others, and I think it does depend a lot on your profile, to be honest with you. I think as to whether you're somebody who can do that fast, or and that's where the key is to ask for help either from experts or consultants or people who can come in and go, look, I can help you make that change because that's what I do. I'm a change facilitator. That's part of what I do. But it's also about having someone else to shift your thinking. It's hard to do it on your own, I think.
Yeah, I think it is. And so some of the research that I was involved in the kind of 90s around what we call tolerance for uncertainty, probably only about 2% of the population are really comfortable with uncertainty and kind of what people would describe chaos, like really comfortable so that they enjoy it. And the kind of inveterate learners, what they do is they trying to work out what the reality is, and they make this assumption that they don't know, as opposed to other people who are trying to make the reality what they want it to be, which is a very different kind of perspective. And we get this whole kind of range of people. And so right at the bottom of this, and you're talking about profiles, is this idea of people's tolerance for uncertainty. And also, as you were saying, the kind of speed of it. Interesting, really interesting. So what are the kind of range of pivots that you've seen over the years?
I mean, we've seen. I mean, so it depends. I mean, I'll give you an example, I suppose, for a couple of examples. I mean, we've seen so many different pivots in terms of, that was a manufacturing example I gave you before. Obviously, professional services, in terms of pivoting around some of those kind of things. I'll give you an example. So I've got a client of mine who runs English language schools and training in the holidays for students from Italy, from China, from all over the world, really, Brazil as well. Obviously, when the lockdown happened, there is a good example because suddenly nobody was traveling and nobody was coming. But you've got this audience, and I think it's a key thing is to understand who your audience is as well. You had this audience of teachers who would normally come with their students to the UK who were stuck at home and who were essentially in this position of not having any support. So when you come from it from a place of like, who are we trying to serve, who are we trying to look after, who are we trying to support, they were able to very quickly reach out to that community and build a Facebook group of, I think it was about 1,500 teachers globally who were English teachers who'd never had any formal training in how to teach English. They were bringing the kids to the UK and then actually run training courses to train teachers. So teacher training courses online. That turned into a whole business of itself, and now they've got online products. They're creating digital revenue globally, and when the market comes back and people are able to come back to the UK, that will just be another layer of value creation and multiple streams of income that sits on top of the existing business. So that was really a question of just understanding, who's in need of support right now, and what could we do to support that community in a way that would at the same time serve but also generate cash for us as well. And that's kind of a key thing, I think, is to learn quickly. I think the research brought that out, is about your ability to how quickly can you learn a new set of skills. Because they were not an online business. They were a physical location-based business generating money with taking schools in the summers or taking universities. And they had to shift to being an online membership and online training business. Now, that pivot requires a huge amount of skill development, retraining of a team, and also an ability to learn a whole brand new business model. And I think sometimes pivot, and hats off to the member of F12, Celine, bless her, give her a name check, who she committed to learning, like intense learning for 2 or 3 months to figure out how to do this. And learn this entire business model. So I think part of, when you ask, what have I observed? I think the thing I would say I've observed the most is that the business owners or the leaders or the senior managers who are prepared to learn new skills, to harness new opportunities, they're the ones that seem to pivot more successfully than people who go, look, I've got this skill set and I want it to work over here. Sometimes you need to realize, actually, the current skills you've got are not the skills you're going to need for a successful pivot.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I would agree. And when you look at some of the really famous pivots, Slack is a really nice one, right?
Yeah.
So, the founder of that, Butterfield, he set out with a games company, and he had to build something so that all his software people who were spread out, because he was using a kind of distributed network of software people, he wanted them all to be able to communicate. And he built something for that to happen, and the game didn't, I think it was called Never Ending, didn't really take off. So he then built another game, and that didn't go. And then he started to realize he had this communications tool on his hands,
Yeah.
and he kind of pivoted that from the second game is called Glitch, I think, which is a nice name. He then pivoted to Slack. Slack now,
$1 billion
2020,
business, right?
well, it's worth about $5.1 billion.
But I think that goes back to an important point, I think, which is Slack was, my take on that would be Slack solving a problem. Right? So Slack is solving a real problem for businesses. And I think this is a key thing with Pivot as well. And we were talking about this yesterday at F12. We were saying, look, the fastest way to really kind of change your business, and so we could use pivot in that word, is to change your customer. So he had with the games, that's B2C, and you're selling something people want or may or may not want. Whereas actually, when he pivoted his customer as much as anything in terms of going, look, actually, we're going to sell to businesses who have a definable problem and actually will pay to solve that problem. And I think if you're going to successfully pivot, you've got to ask the question, who is the customer, and has it changed? And do we need to change our customer? Yeah. Because quite often the most successful pivots have come when businesses change who they're selling to. That and then because they're able to solve a much more valuable problem. And that's a great example of it. Yeah. The games, selling a game, you're not solving a massive problem for a consumer. You're trying to create a demand, but you're not solving a massive problem. But the business who had a communication problem, you're solving a huge problem, and therefore people will pay you a lot more money for it. So successful pivots usually, in my experience, get really clear about it involves changing a customer to some extent in terms of who they're serving and who they're selling and who they're actually trying to do business with. It can fundamentally shift it. I mean, it's no difference from the exhibition company. They went the other way. They were B2B, and then they went B2C, business to consumer, selling desks for homes, and then that was a pivot into a different customer segmentation.
And it's going back to this thing about moving into a completely different market, and changing everything, the structure, and goes back to that whole idea of kind of organizational flexibility. Brilliant. Okay, great.
Is this helpful, by the way? Is it? Because I think hopefully it's bringing it alive for people listening to this in terms of going, because I think sometimes you hear, change the market, and it's sort of, what does that mean? It's like, no, just change your customer. Think about go back to that question. It's like, who do we need to serve? Who's got a problem right now that we have the skills, capability to actually be able to help? For me, if you ask that question, it's usually going to throw up way better answers than like, what are we trying to sell?
Yeah. So there are generally two types of pivot. There are kind of iterative pivots that are the kind of smaller ones, and they're kind of focused on kind of improving our market positioning, and they tend to be triggered by kind of competitor moves or technological developments and things, or complete pivots of the type that we're talking about here, where we move into a completely different space. The business model is different, the whole thing is different, because we've had this realization and we completely move into a totally different space. I
think you can see that a lot. I think if you and the way I would interpret that is, if you look at a lot of retailers at the moment, you've seen a lot of retailers do iterative pivots into shifting online, closing stores in the high street and moving everything online. That's to me, that's kind of like the existing, what you're selling isn't changing, and even who you're selling to isn't changing. So it's more of a iterative kind of like, we're just changing the leverage model, how we're actually delivering the product or service. That would be my take on it anyway, I think.
Yeah. No, I would agree. Definitely. Cool. So in your experience, what is it that pushes an entrepreneur or a business owner into doing a pivot and then seek help?
Good question. I think there's two things really. It's usually pain, right? To be honest, it's usually life suddenly got very painful, and they've suddenly got a level of pain that's got their attention. I'd say that's one. Or fear, if I was going to say. I think there's two things that drive people to do pivots. It's either the fear of realization that if I don't pivot, I'm not going to have a business in 90 days' time, or the pain of actually the money's moved, I haven't, we've got our sales funnels drying up, we're going to have a cash flow crisis, or we've got a cash flow crisis, and actually we need to figure out how to fix that. So it's usually one of those two things in my experience. The sad fact is, I think not enough people reach out for help. I think that's a fundamental thing. I struggled, I think, my whole career. I said the other day that most business owners will pay more money to learn how to get taught to drive a car than they will to get paid to get taught to how to pivot their business or learn to build a successful business. And that's never really made any sense to me. For me, the most successful people I've had the privilege of working with, and I've worked with some incredibly successful entrepreneurs, right? And like millionaires and multimillionaires, and some people who've just come out of the gate swinging and done really well. The thing is that they've been smart enough to know they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And that whole kind of, look, be addicted to learning. It's like, look, the game is constantly changing. And if you're not constantly staying sharp, sharpening your sword, learning new skills, understanding how it's changing, and you're not growing as a leader, your organization is fundamentally going to get stuck at some point. And I think that most people get to the point where they're desperate for solutions. And that always, and if somebody comes to me and says, listen, Paul, we've got a problem with our business, we're about to run out of money in 90 days, can you help us? And I'm like, well, the honest answer is you should have come and talked to me a year ago when you had warning signs this was going to happen, because you can't always, there aren't silver bullet solutions. If to some businesses, they're just too late. Some people come too late for help. So I think for me, it's like, look, the first sign that you've got a challenge and you might need to pivot is when you should ask for help. Do not wait until it's the last gasp, because most people can't, you can't pivot most businesses when they're less than 60 days away from going broke. It's incredibly hard to do it. Now you can, but it requires a level of skill that most people in my experience don't have to pull off on their own. Because at that point, it's like you get one thing wrong and you're going to be wiped out. So for me, it's like, look, ask for help early in the process. And there's a phrase I said that if you're not prepared to break your own business model, if you're not looking at it going, how would I compete with myself? Right? If I was my competition, how would I beat me? Right? And then set about re-engineering your business model so that you're better than you are, and you stop that happening. Because 9 times out of 10, the people that come into your market and are going to catch you out, or the pivots you're going to need, are going to come because you didn't see something coming.
Yeah.
Right? Most pivots are caused not because of the stuff you can see strategically, it's the stuff you never saw coming. That's what causes a pivot, in my experience, right? So it's like, the minute it happens, you got to go, right, who can ask for help on this? Who's been here before? Who's got a model? Who's been through this before? I mean, just to give you an example, right? So yesterday in our meeting here in our marquee, right, we had I think it was 4 of the members in the room shared how last month was their best month ever. Like, not just in the crisis, but ever. And some of those businesses have been in business 3, 5, 10 years. And it's a mindset thing as well, Dave. I think in terms of going, look, you can either see something as a crisis or as an opportunity. That's a mindset, and it entirely goes into where you're prepared to put your energy and focus. If you choose to see it as a crisis, you're going to struggle, because mentally you're going to be in that fear mindset. If you see it as an opportunity, you're going to go, we have an opportunity to redesign the business. We have an opportunity to take it back to basics, which is something most of the clients who've been really successful over the last 3 or 4 months that I work with have done, is that we've used the opportunity not just to pivot, but to go back to core. Like, what is the core engine that drives the business? What is the core product that actually we need to sell to really engage customers? And it's like, some of us, the pivot comes from go back to core first, and that's where the strength is, and then pivot off that core, which is your strength.
Yeah, I would go with that. There's an interesting thing that's kind of come out of the research. In fact, I was doing an interview with a researcher from America, Reagan Stevenson, and they did some really interesting research looking at entrepreneurs, and found that contrary to what everybody believes about entrepreneurs are particularly bad at making pivots. Largely because what they do is they identify their business with themselves. It kind of becomes a part of their identity. And they find it very hard to move out of that identity. And because it's part of their identity, they stick with a business and a business idea and a model way longer than they should do.
Yeah.
And that it's a very small percentage of entrepreneurs actually who are the kind of masters of pivoting.
Well, I think that's I'm really fascinated by that, because it goes back to something I've always taught, which is about your identity. What's your identity? So if you come in, and people quite often when they join like one of my mastermind programs, I know you've been in one, they come in with the identity of I'm a business owner, right? Which puts them in the operational mindset. I run the business. And I say, when you start to see yourself as a business builder, right, and this is the business you're currently choosing to build, there's then you're less emotionally attached to it, because you're going, I'm a business builder. This is the one I'm building right now. And it might have a lifespan of 5 years. It might have a lifespan of 10. It might have a lifespan of 3. And I've got a client yesterday who's busy. He's had a business for 20 years. He's done great out of it, right? He's done really well. He's made really good money. The challenge is, and he said it yesterday in the room, is that the industry he's in is contracting at a rate of 40% a year. Now, at some point, you've got to go, this is not an easy place to build a business anymore. This is just going to get harder and harder. And actually, I just need to be accepting of the fact that the money is moved. And if I'm a business builder, not a business operator, it's that different mindset, then I need to go look for the next opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's, that I think it's fascinating, because I think it's that the minute you get stuck in that I own this business, no, you're operating this business. If you're a business builder, then you'll build multiple businesses. Some will fail, some will succeed, some will be amazing, right? But it's really, what's your identity? And I think identity for me drives behavior.
Yeah, definitely.
And if you're an ego, let's be honest, Dave, look, if you start your business on your own, you've got to have a healthy amount of ego, or you wouldn't try, right? So,
yeah,
we want to be right. We want to be right. When I had a business failure 6 years ago, it's the hardest thing in the world to deal with, because you have to admit to yourself that you got it wrong, and that's hard. That's really hard, because you've got to admit you don't know it all, and that's the thing that it's like the people who, in my mind, succeed and pivot the most are the ones that go, I'm happy to accept I don't know it. I don't know everything, and therefore I'm going to stay in that learning mode. And that's what leads to successful pivots in my experience, anyway.
I agree, and certainly one of the things that a couple of the things that we're seeing coming out of the kind of research on pivots is that decision to pivot is, as you were saying, the kind of fear factor is largely based on 3 aspects. How big the threat is.
Yeah.
Because it needs to be big enough to push us out of the comfort zone, but also out of our mindset and this sense of ownership. But we also have this sense, and I've done this in the past, where you think, I've put all this work into this, I don't want to lose it.
Yeah.
So we kind of hold on to it. The second one, which is an even bigger factor, is how immediate the loss is going to be. And that's been shown to be quite a really big, important factor in this. So like, how much runway have I got? Like, am I facing disaster in the immediate future or longer? And what we see is people got a longer runway tend to delay the decision to pivot. And then lastly, just about how much uncertainty there is about the future and their own tolerance of uncertainty. And if they don't have a lot of tolerance of uncertainty, then it becomes a bit of an issue.
I love that, by the way, and I love that. Can I just talk to two
of course.
quick bits in there?
Yeah.
So this concept of sunk costs catches a lot of entrepreneurs out. But I'll give an example of like one of the most gutsy experiences I ever had with a client who was confronting this. Can you hear all that in the background, or is it just me?
No, I can't hear it.
Okay, cool. I was doing a 3-day leadership retreat for a software company, and on day 2 we were having a conversation about product development and product roadmaps and what we were looking at and where was the future of the market going and all those kind of good things. And the topic for discussion for the session of the day was, what are we going to do with this particular product? And the company had sunk about £500,000 into developing the product, but it still wasn't right. It still wasn't great. And all those kind of things. Anyway, during the course of that conversation, I asked the question, how much is it going to take to get this product to market and get it monetized and get it making money? And they were like, well, it's going to cost at least another 200,000-300,000. So you can pretty much accept it's going to cost £1 million by the time you're all done. And I went, right, if you had £500,000 or £300,000 to invest somewhere else in the business, where would you put it and what would it do? And they had all the answers to that question, right? We'd put it here, it would grow this market, we'd go into the US, we'd do this, we'd do it. They knew all the answers to that. So I'm like, so I said, why are we fighting keeping this thing alive if we know that it's going to take £300,000 more and it's not really what you want to do and where you want to put your energy? And the MD said, because it's we spent 3 years and £500,000. I said, yeah, but it's sunk cost, right? I said, it's gone. And there's a great quote by Tim Ferriss, who the author of the 4-Hour Workweek, which I love. He said, and this is so powerful. He said the big shift happened for him once. He said, when you realize that the way you sometimes lose money is not the way you have to make it back.
Yeah.
Right. And we had this conversation, and in fairness to the board, fair credit to the owners as well, the owners just went, do you know what? Kill it. Like, kill it. Let's just kill it right here, right now in the room. And I remember the board and the senior management team being like, are you serious? We spent 3 years on this. They were like, look, there's no point coming away for a 3-day strategic planning event unless we're prepared to have the courage to make brave decisions, right? And it's a sunk cost. It doesn't matter. It's gone. It's like you've spent it. It's gone through the business. And it isn't delivering value. And I think some of it is like knowing when to quit. Yeah, and I think definitely. Too many of us get, there's the kind of sort of motivational stuff that drives me crazy when people go, oh, winners don't quit. No, sometimes you need to quit. Sometimes stuff is just not going to work and you got to get out of it and get into something that's better. And they took the £300,000 they were going to invest in that, put it into a different part of the business, created an entirely different division within 12 months that made them twice what they had lost in that, venture before. Yeah. And I think you've got to have the ability to not fear shifting out of something that isn't working to finding something that could work better. And the sunk cost keeps us trapped mentally because we go, I don't want to lose the money. When you realize it's already lost, it's gone, it's done. And, it happens to us all, me included, right? We had to close an office in Australia in the last 3 months because the person there got ill, got sick. It was sunk cost, doesn't matter. And I remember my finance lady getting heart, like literally, she go, we put some money in. It doesn't matter. It's done, right? It's now about energy. Where are we going to put our energy? And I think that's, if you're going to pivot, you've got to ask the question about what do we need to stop spending time, energy, and resources on in order to put the energy and resources into what's going to work. Yeah. Because actually, sometimes it is about getting rid of clutter to focus on actually what's going to move the needle. And I think. I love your point about delayed consequences because I like health and fitness is a big thing in my life, and I would say if you went to a fast food joint and you got sick 24 hours after eating an unhealthy meal, you would stop eating unhealthy food, and that is so true because success is small steps and failure is small steps.
Yeah. Definitely.
That's the catch.
Yeah, there's actually 2 other things that are happening here. So I was doing some work with the NHS a couple of years ago. So there's kind of 2 concepts that help here. One is what we call cognitive tunneling. So we get caught in this pipeline of thinking because we're heading in a certain direction, and all the thinking stays in that kind of pipeline. And then we also get what we call decision-making pipelines. So, for example, you go to the doctors and the first doctor diagnoses you with, I don't know, diabetes, and then sends you to a consultant. The consultant's looking at you through the lens and down this pipeline of diabetes. And all of their decision making is in this pipeline. And we see the same with projects. And that kind of these decision-making pipelines, you can get an awful long way down the pipeline before somebody goes, actually, the original diagnosis may not be right. This may not be whatever it happens. This may not be diabetes, for example. And the same thing happens in organizations. They make a decision that X is going to run, that we're going to do this. And everybody inside that pipeline is now trying to make that work. And what they're not doing is looking at it from the outside or looking out to what's happening. And they end up just wandering down this pipeline. And it's the same in businesses. We are this identity, we are a publishing company, or we are a manufacturing company, or we do cars, or whatever it happens to be, which pushes us into this pipeline. And one of the things that's very strong in the research is that kind of thinking really goes against pivots and gets people to be, really slow in making a pivot.
I love that. That's amazing. I love that. Actually, I'm going to borrow that and use that if that's okay with you, because I love that. But I think it also speaks to a point in the research that came out, which is organizations that successfully pivot seek outside help. And I think that's probably how you overcome that, because you get someone else who comes back in and goes, could we go back to the original question that led us down this tunnel in the first place? Like, why did we ask it and why did we go that way? Yeah. And somebody who comes in and almost comes in, and I like to say, it's like my job sometimes is to ask the dumb question. It's like, well, why did we do that in the first place? And somebody goes, well, because, and then and you go, well, yeah, but that's based on a whole bunch of assumptions that are no longer true. So it's like, sometimes I think the only people who can do those kind of questions and come in is external consultants or external advisors, because they're walking without any of the preconceived baggage or beliefs, and they're not emotionally invested, right? It doesn't matter to me whether or not this project's been running for 5 years or 3 years. I haven't got that investment of time and relationship in it. I've come in to just fix it and get it working. And therefore, our ability to go, look, I just want to ask the right question I don't come with that tunnel vision. I think it's a brilliant insight. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And that, this couples with a number of things. I was talking about that 2% who are really good with uncertainty because they don't make those assumptions about what they know. They assume they don't know. What they do is they collect information from this variety of sources, kind of 360, including the cleaners. What are you seeing? Yeah. Because they're trying to work out what the reality of the situation is, rather than either prove what the reality is or do something first. So understanding what the marketplace is, what's happening out there, and it takes that objectivity and the lack of connection, I suppose, especially. Oops, I don't know why that's happening. That lack of emotional connection to be able to do that, and that's kind of an important part of that process. Okay. Go on.
On that, because I love it. Because I was with a great guy who came and spoke at one of my inner circle meetings recently from South Africa, a guy by the name of Vic, and he shared this incredibly powerful story about how he was running a board of directors, but he used to invite different people from the company to come and chair or be on the board. And in one of the meetings, which I thought was really interesting perspective, sort of strategically, and he invited the guy who was on the gate at the front of the business to come in and sit in the board meeting and give input, right? And he said he always used to invite different people from different parts of the business because they would get a completely different take on stuff. And during this board meeting, they were thinking about relocating the entire business sort of 5 miles down the road or something. And this guy who was on the front gate said, that's a really bad idea. And everyone was like, look, it's going to make us more money. It's going to be this. And the guy on the front gate just went, it's a really bad idea. And everyone went, well, why? And he said, because Joan and Jill and Marianne or whatever, he said they won't be able to come to work anymore. And then everyone was like, well, what are you talking about? It's 5 miles down the road. He said, yeah, but they walk 3 miles to get to work now. That would mean they'd be walking 8 miles to get to work, and they can't do that. And then the board had like it was just a fascinating kind of conversation. And the irony of the whole story is they didn't move because they suddenly realized that actually half of their entire team in South Africa walked to work, and they just hadn't even triggered that. But the funny part of the story is where they would have moved 5 miles down the road, a sinkhole developed like 3 years later, and had they gone there, the very business would have literally fallen into the ground. So this guy they had on the board, and it's not my story, it's his story, but this guy they had on the board who was at the front gate literally saved the company from ending up literally in a hole.
Yeah, we see this time and time again, particularly in times of uncertainty. It's that initial kind of what's real, what am I seeing here, and not making any assumptions, or making the assumption that you don't know, rather than trying to say I know. And that makes the big difference. And that's one of the core differences that this 2%, these kind of what we call generative leaders have. Right. They have that ability to be objective and say, I don't know, I need to discover. So it's a process of discovery, and they ask all around. Yeah. Interesting.
Where can you get that, Dave? Where can, just for those people who are listening in who might not know, where can, like, that kind of research sounds fascinating. Like, where could we get access to that research about generative learners and leaders? Like, where would my audience find that, for example?
Yeah, okay. So I did a book in 2006 called The Ambiguity Advantage, which is
which is over that shoulder.
There, yep. So all that research is in there in a very readable form, so it's not in a researchy type form, and it talks about that kind of range of reactions to uncertainty,
Right.
right from what we call technical leaders, and these are the people who deny change. So you just look at the start of the COVID thing. The political leaders were going, "Oh, this isn't a problem. This, it's not going to affect us." They were just in denial. They weren't seeing the data that was coming from all the other countries, right through to, as we say, the generative leaders who have this set of beliefs. They see the world very differently. They're doing things like, and some of the things that you were talking about, they're running experiments. They're looking for patterns.
Mm.
And they're looking and they're gathering data from lots of sources that lots of people wouldn't normally, like the guy on the gate or the cleaner or whatever it happens to be, because they're trying to build up a picture of what on earth is going on here. And on that assumption that, their ego isn't part of this. And they don't, that they follow the data and the evidence rather than following their own ego or what they're trying to do. So, and then there's a whole range. So there's four main modes of being, I suppose, modes of seeing. They're actually worldviews. So there's four types of worldview that leads you into how good you are at dealing with uncertainty.
Wow.
We'll do a podcast about it, or a
Yes, that's
video about
fascinating.
it. I'll
I
run
mean, I
some
would have
stuff
thought that
on
would have been hugely, hugely insightful for people at the minute, just because
it.
I think, how you deal with change is going to become one of the most important things over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years in whatever you do, right? Whether you, and families are changing, businesses are changing, the world is going to change, and it's not slowing down. So as we head towards society 5.0, you've really got to figure out how you deal with change and how you need to personally pivot. And I think that's always important, I think, as well, because sometimes you think it's just a business that pivots, and it's not. You can pivot as an employee inside a business to shift the value that you create. And you can also pivot the very industry that you have a job in. So, this mindset that I'm in this industry for life, forget it. That's going to catch up with you.
Yeah. And there's a cognitive pivot just in seeing the new world as it is, and then, as we say, getting your head around the new world and working out how it works is part of that kind of cognitive pivot that we had to do right at the start of the coronavirus pandemic. But we're going to have to do, because people say when we get back to normal, it never goes back to normal. No matter what happens, we're on a one-way path here, and there is never a back to normal.
Yeah, we jumped forward. We jumped forward 3 years in terms of the technical evolution and technology.
I would say 5. Yeah, definitely.
3 years in 3 months.
Yeah.
And we never go back as a society. That we just don't do that. We go forward. We don't go backwards, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, and it happened when we went from the agrarian age to the manufacturing age. It happened when we went from the manufacturing age to the digital age, and it's happening now as we shift into this the next wave with AI learning and the big data and all the things that are driving this. That frankly, coronavirus is that's just a trigger in the journey. And I was talking to my mastermind about this yesterday, about it's the second wave you want to pay attention, not the second wave of the virus, but the second wave of change that's coming, which is going to be driven by AI, big data, the Internet of Things, all of those things that are coming together. That's going to drive and accelerate change. And if you think you won't be affected by it, you are in that space of denial, and you will be made irrelevant. That's the sad fact, is like the economy doesn't care. It will make you irrelevant if you will not pivot. It will make you irrelevant. You can either be relevant or you can be out. You can be gone. It's your choice, right? And that's brutal, but that's the world we live in, and it doesn't care. That's the harsh thing about it. When you realize it's not personal, so your choice to thrive or your choice to struggle is your choice.
There are kind of considered to be kind of six drivers of change, but 6 forces that are exerted on us constantly that create the change. I've got to remember this. This is something I teach the students. It's called PESTEL, which is political change, which is continual, environmental change,
Yeah.
There's scientific change, technological change. Can't remember what last. Economic change and legal change, and then societal change as well. I missed out an S.
And there's a big shift in societal change going on right now, right? Massively right now.
Yeah.
You're getting a whole kind of, there's a rebalance, people craving for a rebalancing of the wealth equation. And, that's going to drive different tax legislation without question. That's going to change all kinds of things. So I think someone said to me on an interview the other day, they said, what's the number one ability you need to have in business to be successful? And I said, flexibility. That's it.
Yeah,
I said it's not marketing, it's not sales, it's not. It's flexibility. If you're not flexible, you will struggle. Period.
Yeah, and it's flexibility in here, in the head, cognitive flexibility, that ability to be able to see things as they really are, and then, in fact, there are four. What's it? I get this. Okay, so one of the things that came out of the research for this book was that there are kind of four things that contribute to whether or not an entrepreneur or a business owner is going to pivot, right? So the first one's the aspirations of the business or the owner themselves, and what they've found is higher levels of aspiration, that I want to do well, those kinds of things, predict a pivot. The proactive personality of the individual. Now, this whole idea of proactivity is getting really big in the research world. We're finding that it's connected to a lot of activity, particularly around entrepreneurs, but in organizations and things. So higher levels of proactivity, this desire to take action and to do things, as opposed to down at the other end, laziness.
I'm going to call you on that one, mate, because I disagree with that language type. I'll tell you why. Because proactivity is something you can test for with the contribution compass profile. We call it activating energy. People with a lot of activating energy can be proactive because they have that inside of them. People who are, let's just say, more sustaining energy, because that's the language we would use, they need activators to get them moving. So they need, Becky works for me. Becky's brilliant. But Becky has this profile that, if I don't direct Becky and say, go do this, do this, do this, Becky will wait to be given instructions. Now, Becky's not lazy at all, right? But Becky's entire profile lacks... No, she's not, and you know it, right? But Becky's profile lacks activating energy. So she needs to be activated by somebody with that kind of energy. So for me, this goes back to that whole thing of, look, you can't manage everybody the same. And for me, proactivity is something you can measure. So if you haven't got enough proactivity in the organization, you need to recruit more proactivity, and that's something you can test for, which is kind of quite exciting. Sorry, I took you off track there.
No, I go with that definitely. So the level of perseverance or grit that the individuals have, and then higher levels of perseverance also predicts the chances of either no pivot or an iterative pivot, and then the level of impulsiveness that has, and high levels of impulsiveness predict a complete pivot, but also predict sometimes lower levels of success in pivots because it's less thought through. So it's kind of counterbalanced with those things. So
I've done that in my career as well. I think sometimes sometimes you think it's a pivot when actually if you're being honest about it, it's that you just got bored and you wanted to do something else. And there's a big difference between a pivot and I'm just bored, I want to do something else.
Or you're just running away from something.
Or I don't want to deal, confront the brutal facts, right? So I don't want to deal with the reality that this is really uncomfortable.
Okay, so two final questions then.
Yeah, great conversation though, Dave.
Yeah, I know, it's really interesting.
I'm taking loads of notes here. I hope everyone listening to this is, because I've written like a page and a half of notes just on what you're saying.
Well, same here. It's anyway. It's a nice kind of interaction between the research and the kind of practicalities of. So just from your experience, what are the factors that lead to successful pivots for SMEs, for example, or organizations?
Well, I think to be fair, we've probably covered most of them in the last kind of 5 or 10 minutes. I think it's that the ability to adapt and adopt new ways of working. I think it's the ability to I talk about turning fear from a headwind into a tailwind. It's like, can you turn it into something that drives you forward rather than that you're so scared about what if we get it wrong, rather than going, look, we're just going to rapidly test and evolve, and lose this this concept of failure. And I
Yeah.
think the other thing I would say, and great research over the years by Jim Collins in his book Good to Great talks about this, where I learned it from, which is he talks about the concept of bullets, not cannonballs, where like the armies that used to be successful were the ones that fired bullets until they knew they hit the target, then they'd fire the cannonball. Yeah. And I think a pivot is about fire small until you know that you found the flow, you found the new money source, and then go big in. And I think people who have, in my experience, failed with their pivots have gone, look, this is where I think the market is, let's go all in, only to find out they've sunk so much resource into it that the market actually isn't there or doesn't want what they think. And now they've not got enough resources to get out and try again. And that's usually what leads to failure. So I think get good at testing small and the test and scale, rather than going, I think I trust my gut on that. 9 times out of 10, every time you think you're right, the market will come back and go, well, not really. And it's like so do your research and test small until you found, great, we found the flow. Here's where the money flow is now. Let's start moving into that and keep testing those assumptions. So I think for me, it's about that. The successful pivots of people have been not afraid to change. Don't see it as failure, just see it as evolving, and are prepared to let go of their current business model, because they may actually end up with a better one, right? We've had clients of ours in the last 3 or 4 months who've ended up with completely different businesses that they're sitting there saying to themselves, this is better than the one I actually had in January, right? It's like, it's actually better. I actually like this one. This one's better. And it's like, look, pivoting and change isn't always going to end up with something worse. It's going to, 9 times out of 10, it ends up with stuff better. But you would never have got the opportunity to let go of stuff and refine it without whatever's being forced upon you, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So when I was doing the research for the book, we realized, from the research, there are 7 largely success factors for pivots. Right. And that, you've covered them, which is brilliant. So the first one's what we call organizational ambidexterity. And that's that ability to be able to flex and change. But also, so organizational ambidexterity is an idea about being able to keep the money coming in from the existing something going on, whilst at the same time innovating and shifting. And
that's a really key point. I know just what I want to, because actually you just bring up something that I think is really critical, right? Is that most SMEs get stuck because the pivot, they either run out of money before they pivot, and that's happened a lot in coronavirus, where entire revenue streams have dried up. The successful pivots happen, you're right, where they're able to start the pivot, but at the same time maintain an income stream, so that they've got the time to test and measure. Whereas if you run out of the existing income stream, again, it creates too much stress, which clouds judgment, right? Yeah. So just
no, absolutely, yeah. It's, and it's about building up a war chest or a disaster chest, just in case, as they say, cash is king.
90 days. I would say everybody I know that's done really well in my client base, follow the advice I've said for years, which is the minimum you should have in the bank at any given time is 90 days of operating cash, minimum. And you should, in all honesty, aim to get to 12 months. Microsoft was famous for always having 12 months in the bank of operating costs as it grew all the time, so that if anything ever went wrong, you could weather the storm. You weren't in a situation where you had to panic. And I think every one of the clients of mine that was reporting really great results yesterday has had at least 6 to 12 months worth of operating cash in the bank. They're able to, in some cases, 2 of them actually bought competitors in the last 90 days because they had the liquidity to do it. So it's like, if you're not liquid, it's harder, right? Yeah. And that's delayed gratification. That means not taking every penny out of the business just because you're doing well. It means going, look, winter's gonna come. Spring happens, summer happens, winter happens. It doesn't matter how good things are now. Winter will come. You need to be preparing for winter, right? I live on a farm, and I watch the farmers, and like, they get seasonality and seasons, and business owners just don't. We think summer's going to last forever. No, winter will come, right? Regardless of what you do about it, it will come.
Yeah, shift happens.
Yeah, true. Anyway, sorry, what were the other 7? I'm loving it.
No. So organizational ambidexterity. So The second one is a learning and a problem-solving orientation and a culture within the team, within the organisation.
Great.
And you know, and we've talked about this idea of having a learning orientation and being a veteran, trying to find out what's actually going on, learning. Yeah, and that's a major thing. Team composition, which is a big issue that I know that you look at, and that includes developing a team that has a learning orientation, that has diversity in what we call domain expertise. So you've got enough diversity within the organization in terms of their knowledge and their ability, or you can bring it in quickly.
Yeah.
Kind of, and again, you were talking about this in slightly different terms, having a systematic or scientific approach to experimentation. So it's not just all over the place. You're actually following leads of investigation, and it's not just kind of random.
That links back, just if I can,
please.
So that links back to the team piece. And obviously, you know, I'm passionate about teams because I think it's the biggest thing that makes a difference to a successful business is whether you've got the right team.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, hence why I own a company called Team Dynamics. But the reality is everything you're talking about there in terms of research and data and analysis is what we would call refining energy in the contribution compass. And if you haven't got refining energy on the team, you're going to struggle because the contribution people with that energy make is their ability to analyze data, see trends, look at the details, and come back and what I call act on fact.
Yeah.
And that's where the refining energy adds massive value to the team. That's its contribution. So if you don't have a balance of that energy on the team, you're always going to be acting on gut or instinct. And actually, sometimes you need somebody to go, well, hang on a minute, the data actually doesn't support remotely what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, that brings me to the next thing, which is having an evidence-based approach, that act on fact, you know, make sure that you're dealing with evidence here and not just your own assumptions. And the last thing for the team composition is creativity, so that there's somebody, or at least the team is developing, they can think about things. And then the last four major things are proactivity, open innovation. And what that means is that you're doing environmental scanning, you're going out and looking, and you're keeping your eye on what's going on out there, technologies and things, and using them and bringing them in, following the feedback and the evidence objectively. And then lastly, kind of a systematic testing of hunches and hypotheses. And they've been shown as the 7 major kind of success factors for pivots.
Love it. I mean, like, what's interesting is that quite a few of those, funny enough, almost by design, although it wasn't intentional when I did it that way, you know, a mastermind actually covers a lot of those off. Because if you don't have the creative energy, usually somebody in the mastermind has the creative ideas and input. So if you're not creative, there'll be 2 or 3 other people in the mastermind who can bring their ideas. You can test stuff. We regularly have members who go, look, I'm thinking of doing this. They run it by and 11 other business owners go, that's a good idea, or that sucks, or I wouldn't do it this way. So you can test stuff in a safe environment. And some of the feedback is, say, people hundreds of thousands of pounds on things they thought were a great idea. And everyone in the room went, nah, that sucks. Don't do that. That's awful. Right. And so I think it's really interesting because I think a mastermind actually helps facilitate with quite a lot of the 7 things, which is probably why so many in the members in the room yesterday have had really successful pivots in the last 4 or 5 months. There's a reason why it's helped accelerate that success change, right?
Yes. Yeah. And just being in that culture, you know, having people around you that are thinking like that makes a big difference rather than just being on your own.
Well, I think isolation, but there's one other thing I think is really interesting is that when you see somebody else successfully pivot, I think it gives you the belief that you can do it. So like when you see somebody go, oh, look, we just changed this, and we're doing really great. And you go, well, if they did it, I can do it. That's a belief reinforcer.
Yeah.
And I think that's for me, that's really a powerful piece as well. Is like, you're not just going, I'm the only one battling with this stuff.
Yeah, one of the things that has come out a lot in the research and is becoming quite a theme is this idea of what they call self-efficacy, this belief that I can solve this problem. I don't know the answers, I don't know how to solve it, but I have a belief that I can conquer it, I can learn enough, and I can move through it.
Yeah,
and I think that's very much what you're saying.
Well, certainty, isn't it? You're talking about certainty. You know, we talked yesterday about the kind of things that lead to actions and results. And the first one is certainty. If you don't have certainty, right, then you're not going to move forward. And if you can't see the potential and the possibility and the opportunity, it's like certainty, opportunity, action, result. It's like you've got to have the certainty that you can fix it. You've got to actually be aware of where the opportunity really is. Then you'll take action and then you'll get a result.
Yes.
And it's like, but there's those 4 steps. If I don't have any certainty that I can fix this, I'm not even going to look for the potential, or not even going to go out and see where that might look. And that's something I learned. I learned that model from Tony Robbins, you know, in terms of the idea that, look, you've got to have a level of certainty in who you are and your ability to fix this before you're ever going to see the potential, you know, out there, because you won't even look for it if you don't believe you can do it.
Yeah. It's that self-belief, that self-efficacy is hugely important, and it's coming out more and more and more in the research. Okay, final question then. So you've experienced
grilling me, man. You're grilling me.
I know. You've experienced them. You've seen them. So what are the leading kind of factors that bring about failure in a pivot?
Well, I mean, I think, again, we've probably touched on a lot of these, but I think for me, it's really operating in isolation. If you get isolated and you think, I'm going to try and figure this out all on my own, that's certainly when I had a massive failure. I think the thing is, it's not even a failure in pivot sometimes. I think we've already touched on it. Number one is going in on your gut reaction, not doing small data testing. That's definite. Number two is trying to fix it all on your own. To think that you've got to fix all the answers on your own, rather than sitting down as a team and thinking, how do we as a team solve this? And actually listening to understand. For me, it's about not understanding the contribution that other people on the team can make to solving that problem. So you assume that you have all the answers. That's a massive one for me in terms of,
or that you've got to solve the problem.
Yeah, it's like, look, we as a team, it's the me versus we thinking. If you get stuck in the me thinking rather than the we approach, you're like, we've got to solve this. Who on the team knows about this? Who on the team can we reach out to? Not asking for help and support. Definitely for me, it's like, you know, listen, everybody needs help and support, right? There's something we could all learn from somebody else, and not being open to that consistent learning, I think. And finally, for me, it was like, it's losing sight of who your customer is, and actually how are you trying to serve them, and making it about how do we survive rather than how do we serve. How do we serve and add value to customers, and then the money follows, and then thinking, oh, I'm going to go out and just I need to sell and make money. It's like, when you have that mindset, pivots don't work, because you're not coming at it from the right integrity and intention. That'd be probably 5. Was that 5? I think it was 5.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, cool. Oh, nice list. Okay, let me give you my list from the research.
Great, okay, great. Oh, hang on a second. There's a test.
No. So what we found is the number one is exactly what you were talking about before, just a lack of creativity. The second is having a mixed mindset. And this is things like avoiding challenges, giving up too easily, reacting negatively or defensively to feedback, avoiding negative feedback, self-aggrandizement, and that sense of feeling threatened by others.
It's denial, I think, isn't it? Denial. You could pretty much.
Yeah, denial. Definitely. Yeah, that's part of that. Which is definitely comes under the fixed mindset. A victim disposition, which is showing up very strongly for failures. Which kind of links to people who don't want to take responsibility, or they've got a blame culture. So they blame everything else. You know, it's the world, it's the government, it's everybody else, rather than taking kind of responsibility and saying, right, okay, regardless of what this is, it goes back to that whole self-efficacy, self-belief thing. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to sort it out. A feeling of dependency, so that, you know, you can't make the decisions. You've got to depend on others. And then liking, and this was an odd one, but it was a really interesting couple of studies about wanting to identify as a martyr. So,
some people get off on that, don't they? Big time. It's like, woe is me, I'm being persecuted again. It's like, it's so unfair. Oh God, I hate that. That drives me crazy, because it's just,
I know.
It's like, and which you've heard me talk about this before. It's what we call below the line thinking. The whole kind of below the line, I'm going to blame everybody else. Woe is me. The world's picking on me. Listen, life is tough. I'm sorry. It's tough. It's brutal. It's not personal. And if you take it personally, it will destroy you, right? It's not, listen, if we're all going to face difficulty and tragedy. And if you're this is something I'd share just before we wrap up, is that you're going to play the game of business long enough, you are going to have failures, right? Because you have to do the whole cycle of business. It is a cycle. And one of the best questions I ever got asked was, somebody said to me, how many times have you been around the wheel? And I went, what? And they said, how many times have you been around the cycle? Because cycle is start up, scale up, and then fail, right? Like how many times have you failed? It's like, because if you haven't done the whole cycle, you've never experienced the entire journey of running a business. It's like, you have to get away from it's personal. You are not the business. The business is just what you're building right now. You are not the business. And sometimes you're going to get it right, and sometimes you're going to get it horribly wrong. And if you take it personally, if you really take it as it's you, it's not, this is who I am. No, it's not. This is just what you're doing right now. You are running this business. That's not who you are. You've got to be able to separate the identity between what you do and who you are. Otherwise, you're never going to successfully adapt and evolve as a business. You just not.
Just because a business fails doesn't mean you failed.
No. And it's, by the way, and what is failure anyway? It's like, look, some of the, you and I have had some, we both experienced failures, right? But every time you get failure, it depends whether it makes you better and stronger or whether you decide to run from it. You can either go, listen, I'm going to learn from that and I'm going to get better from that and I'm going to come back stronger. Great. It's a test. It's a test, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, it is, without a doubt. So the last three, so a lack of proactivity, not actually doing something, and then the last two are interesting. Having a sense that your business is locked into a particular product, service, or business model.
Seen that a lot, actually.
Yeah, and it's that kind of cognitive tunneling and the decision-making tunneling. And then last is just being too emotionally attached to your ideas. And all of those six were found to be the most frequent factors in failure for pivots.
I think they'd be the most frequent factors in failure for just about business, period, right? Let alone
life, probably.
Well, yeah, life. I mean, if you get attached to any of this, you have to be able to stay nimble and go. It doesn't, my favorite thing I say to clients all the time is, it doesn't matter what you think, it matters what your customers will pay for. Nobody cares whether you think this is a good product. Nobody cares. It's like the market is going to tell you whether it's a good product and it actually solves a problem, and you've got to get your ego out of the way. Otherwise, you're in for a very disappointing journey.
Yes, definitely. Brilliant. Great.
Great
Anything else?
Man. Loved it. Really enjoyed it.
I know, it's been interesting, isn't it? Really interesting. And any other final points you want to make?
I suppose, where can my audience find out more about your research?
I was going to ask, where can we find you, Paul?
Well, I mean, I'm fairly easy to find. Luckily, I have a really unusual surname. So you can find me on LinkedIn under Paul Avins. You can go to paulavins.com, where you'll find resources. There's free videos on there. There's free ebooks, guides. There's stuff on there about the team profiling that we do. You can find a free report on there, 18-page leadership report on there about successful team building, which is useful given what we talked about. So just go to paulavins.com and you can find out more about just about everything that I do and how I support entrepreneurs to successfully pivot. So yeah, go there or connect with me on LinkedIn. It's always good to connect. I post daily with tips and wisdom and advice and things like that. So I just love to hear what people got out of this and what they found valuable. Actually, it'd be great to get some feedback.
Yes, it would, and I'll put the links into connecting with Paul in the show notes.
Oh, awesome! That'd be brilliant. I tell you what, if that's all right, can I give your listeners a gift? Would that be all right? I kind of like
of course.
So what we talked a bit about the profiling and proactivity and the right kind of thing. So we actually we'll put together a page just for your audience where if they go to contributioncompass.co.uk/special offer.
Yeah.
Right. And you can put the link in the show notes. But if you just go to contributioncompass.co.uk/special offer, then you can save, I think it's 20% off the price of a profile if you want to find out more about one there. So you can just go there and actually take one and save 20%.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, send me over the link and I'll stick it in the show notes.
Awesome.
That's been fantastic. Thank you very much, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Privilege, man. Absolutely. Seriously, Dave, I love our conversations. Every time I talk to you, I always go away inspired and then with a whole load of notes to go away and do more about. So,
yes. Yeah. Well, likewise. Yeah. I really.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me on the show, man.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye.